Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your seats. We've still got a few people trickling in. I think the weather might have had something to do with that. My name's Janice Peterson. I'm from SBS World News, and it's my great pleasure to be here. Welcome to Multicultural Primary Care Cancer Forum at beautiful Noah's. Very windswept, but gorgeous all the same. I hope everyone enjoyed their complimentary wash and blow dry on the way in. I know when I stepped out of the car, it was quite a welcome. It was hectic actually. Before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this magnificent land that we're on today, the Awabakal and Worimi peoples. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend my respects to any First Nations people here today. G'day and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could make it. As I said, it's a bit of a shame about the weather, but we do hope more friends join us here tonight. Usually, at precisely this time of the evening, I'd be behind a news desk. I'd be getting a countdown just as I did tonight, ready to read a national bulletin. SBS, you all know that, right? You're all intelligent people, you're curious about the world, you tune into SBS. I'm happy to say I got a better offer. Look around. How could I say no? These beautiful people in the room, very happy to be here, and thanks again. Thank you particularly to Ashley for extending the invitation. It was worth the trip up the M1. It is indeed my great pleasure to be your host this evening. Now, I understand the Cancer Institute New South Wales has partnered with Hunter New England and Central Coast Primary Health Network, and also the Hunter New England Local Health District to bring you this education session tonight. So thank you to everyone for their help on that front. Let me zip through some housekeeping. Bathrooms, easy to locate through the doors here on your right. Everyone, if you haven't done so, mobile phones, you know the drill, on silent or vibration mode, whatever it is that doesn't make them sing and hum. Love you to do that, but don't turn them off completely because we do want you to get engaged, but I'm going to get to that in a second. In the unlikely event of an emergency, head for the exits. As I like to say, you look around the room, you find the little green man running for his life. You follow him, follow any instructions from the staff here calmly. We will exit in a very calm fashion and await further instruction. But that's not going to happen. We want to keep up the pace tonight, so if you are speaking, you can consider this a gentle but firm nudge. Keep to your time limits. You know, we got to get cracking. But we want to hear from all of you, but just keep those time limits in mind. Also, we are filming tonight. You'll notice the cameras in the back of the room. If you don't want to be on the cameras, that's fine. Just find a seat sort of on the periphery or the perimeter of the room, and you should be out of the glare of the cameras. And just a reminder as well, this is a chat, it's a conversation, a discussion. We would love for you to get involved, even if you're not speaking up behind the lectern or on stage. And it's very easy. On your tables, you'll see that there's this form. You just scan the QR code there, and that will take you to Slido. If you've been to a big event like this before, you probably know the drill. You just scan that, get the app, and you can submit a question. So that's a really good way to get engaged, and we have an incredible lineup of speakers tonight, so we would really love your input. So throughout the night, just think of a way to get engaged, and Slido is a very democratic process. The best questions, or the ones deemed to be the best, you get voted for, they float to the top, and they're the ones that we put to the panel. So you can't, it's not rigged, it's a fair and free and transparent thing. So that is the way that we're going to run the panels this evening. We are all here to make our communities better, to increase the capacity of the primary care sector, to improve cancer outcomes for patients of culturally and linguistically diverse background. And that's a cause close to my heart. I'm the daughter of parents who came from South Africa, so I know how important this is, and how important it is for diverse members of the community to have equitable access. It's important, you know, knowledge is power, and I'm invested in this personally, so I'm really interested to hear from our speakers tonight. And most specifically, we want to boost primary care providers' capacity to promote participation in bowel cancer screening, minimise tobacco harm, and also provide safe care by accessing and utilising Cancer Institute New South Wales resources for culturally and linguistically diverse patients diagnosed with cancer. So thank you all for coming once again and supporting these aims. Folks, we've got a stellar lineup tonight, so you're in for a treat. Here's who's who in the zoo. We've got Professor Tracy O'Brien, New South Wales Chief Cancer Officer and Chief Executive Officer, Cancer Institute New South Wales. And to do what I've told you all to do and stick to the time limits, I think I'm going to zip through these and we can do the proper introductions later on. We've got Darren Crouch, Elizabeth Grist, Dr. Lee Fong, Miss Nyan Thit Tew, Dr. Tom Goodsall, Professor Christine Paul, Mary Mitchell-Hill, Kimberly Williamson and Denise Lyon. So a big treat ahead for us. But it's my great pleasure now to introduce our first speaker for the opening address. She is, of course, held in high esteem, high regard, far and wide. We're so chuffed to have her with us tonight. A familiar face, I'm sure. Professor Tracy O'Brien is the New South Wales Chief Cancer Officer. Don't get up just yet. We want to do a bit of a roll call, a bit of a list of achievements. Chief Executive Officer, Cancer Institute New South Wales, internationally respected clinician, researcher. Tracy is also a haematologist, oncologist, bone marrow transplant expert. She's also a strategic, collaborative, inclusive leader. She's passionate about driving equity of access and outcomes for all people with cancer in this great state and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Professor Tracy O'Brien.
Thank you, Janice. That was an over-the-top introduction and blew the time limits. But I really am pleased to be here today and welcome you all to this really important evening. I too would like to acknowledge the sovereign owners of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I'd like to extend that respect and extend a very warm welcome to any First Nation people attending this forum tonight. Now, look, if our meal is served, please don't think you're being rude. Eat away while the food is hot. I have a house full of teenagers and I'm used to no one listening to me at dinner time. So I will be at home to the chatter of full mouths and knives and forks. Now, this is really a very important event for the Cancer Institute and our partners, as Janice said, the Hunter New England Local Health District and the Hunter New England and Central Coast Primary Health Network. We have a great mix of people in the room today, as well as world-class journalists. We've got GPs, pharmacists, practice managers, practice nurses, allied health professionals, champions in the community, staff of primary healthcare networks, and team members from the Cancer Institute. And I've probably missed a few there, and I do apologise. I really do thank people for coming out on a stormy night, and particularly after a hard day's work. Now, my role as the Chief Cancer Officer really is just to set the scene for our conversation tonight. Now, every year in Australia, more than 150,000 people are diagnosed with cancer, and sadly, 50,000 die. In New South Wales, every second person will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their lifetime. Over the last 20 years, the year-on-year increase in cancer diagnosis has far and away outstripped general population growth, and we can expect about a 30% increase in cancer as a result of our ageing population. That means that around 1.7 million people will be diagnosed with cancer in the next decade. Sobering. But also I find incredibly sobering is that despite significant advances in cure rates over the last few decades, 1 in 3 deaths in this country is a result of cancer. with cancer still being the leading cause of death, disease-related death, in both adults and in children. Cancer is the single most significant contributor to the disease burden on our systems. It's ahead of musculoskeletal disease, heart disease, and mental illness. Now, while these statistics are confronting, it's important to acknowledge that New South Wales has some of the best overall cancer survival rates in the world, actually, and we can be very, very proud of that. But the reality is that there are disparities in both access and in outcomes for many people, including First Nations people. And particularly tonight, we're talking about people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Our challenge as healthcare workers is that we're also operating in an environment that has a rapidly changing cancer landscape. It's driven by an increased volume, the care complexity in diagnostics and in therapeutics, and there's significant health workforce pressures as well. And we need to ensure that with all of these pressures, the equity gaps don't actually widen further. A large number of the drivers for excellence in cancer care are the direct result of the actions of GPs and primary care clinicians, and I want to acknowledge that tonight. The importance of and the remit of primary care is absolutely substantive, and it's critical to patient outcomes and experience. From reducing risk of cancer to early detection, to faster access to specialist treatments, to managing comorbidities and side effects, to providing support for patients both living with and dying from cancer. The GP and the primary care teams really work across the cancer care continuum. Now, New South Wales is proudly the most culturally and linguistically diverse state in Australia, and with a primary entry point for most migrants who settle on our shores. 1 in every 3 persons living in New South Wales was born overseas. More people speak another language at home other than English than in any other Australian state. In Newcastle, 15% of people are born overseas, and nearly a quarter of these are very recent settlers. The Commonwealth's migration policy has also seen an increase in the number of humanitarian entrants settling in New South Wales, including in the Armidale region. And such rapid changes in demographics have required adoption and response to the changing needs of our communities. What is really irrefutable is that cancer mortality can be drastically reduced by detecting cancers at an early stage. Thousands of lives can be saved through free population screening tests, yet the participation rate for eligible women and men, particularly those for culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, remain poor. For bowel cancer, 90% of bowel cancers found in an early stage can be cured. For breast cancer, a mammogram done every 2 years can detect cancer in asymptomatic women, 50 to 74, giving them the best chance of cure. Yet the culturally and diverse participation, people with culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, their participation in the screening program is low. In the Hunter, New England local district area, which is actually one of the best performers in the state, the participation for those from multicultural background is 48%, which is much lower than that from non-cold eligible women. And this figure drastically drops down to 29% for the neighbouring catchment of Central Coast Local Health District. Cervical cancer can be eliminated. Australia is actually out in front in the best position globally to achieve this in the coming decade with the widespread availability of HPV vaccination and our population cervical screening program. Yet more than 70% of Australian women who develop cervical cancer are underscreened or have never been screened. Now, the barriers for screening of our multicultural communities are many, and they include things like stigma associated with cancer, cultural sensitivities to care, language barriers, and many, many more. But what we do know is that the biggest motivational factor, the most powerful behavioural change tool to encourage people to participate in cancer screening is the recommendation, is the endorsement, is the call to action of a person's GP or primary care provider. From encouraging participation in screening programs and supporting people to quit smoking through cessation interventions, primary care plays a crucial role in promoting positive health behaviours, connecting cancer patients with the rest of the health system, and that's particularly so for new migrants and refugees. And the wise counsel and influence of patients' primary care provider also impacts right across their cancer journey. For example, some work done by the Cancer Institute in clinical trials tells us that a GP's first conversation with their patient about the availability of a cancer clinical trial, the advantage of that trial or disadvantage, plays a critical role in their decision to participate or not. The landscape's also changing in relation to voluntary assisted dying, a legal option from the end of November in this year in our state for all terminally ill cancer patients. And this will undoubtedly have implications for the primary care sector on how support is provided within personal, religious, cultural and ethical frameworks. Now, the role of the Cancer Institute is to provide strategic advice and direction for cancer control across New South Wales. We work, like primary care, across cancer prevention, diagnosis and treatment, and we have many initiatives and programs to improve cancer outcomes for members of multicultural communities. But we don't work in isolation. We can't work in isolation. We really do need to work collaboratively, to work smarter and to have stronger partnerships with communities and with primary care, particularly given the enormous workloads that you all face. We also recognise the shortfalls in access and availability of primary care providers now and into the future, and the impact that this can have on cancer patients. So, look, I really hope this evening we'll be able to provide you with some new information, some tools to help support in the important roles that you all play. The sorts of tools that we will be talking about are Can Refer, a resource that can help link to a referral to a bilingual specialist, quality improvement toolkits for your practices, multilingual cancer screening communication aids, in-language patient information and patient-reported measures, in-language clinical trial resources as well. I really look forward to hearing and learning from each of you and your experiences over the next few hours, and encourage the discussion that Janice encouraged in her opening remarks. Together, through genuine partnership and knowledge sharing, I really do believe we can make a difference. Now, we've got a strict timekeeper in Janice, and she's giving me the eye, so I'm going to let our speakers do the rest of the talking. But before I conclude, I do just want to convey my thanks to our partners. To Hunter New England Health District, Liz Grist and team, Ashley Young, the Multicultural Health Service Manager, and Xingshai Chando, thanks for your incredibly valued contribution. And to Lauren Livingstone and the hardworking team at the Hunter New England and Central Coast Primary Healthcare Network, to Alan Meenal, Amy Callanan and Phoebe James. We really couldn't have put all this together without all of the support that you've given, so really genuinely pass on my thanks. And to the brilliant Sheetal Chellam, and who's the Institute's Multicultural Strategic Advisor, and to Beck Dallaport, the Primary Care Strategic Advisor. So I really pass on my thanks to my team for an enormous amount of work behind the scene. Thanks very much for listening to me, even though you weren't eating, as it turns out. I hope you enjoyed tonight, and I really look forward to the conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Got to say, I was stunned by some of the figures you mentioned there. You did say at the beginning it was sobering statistics, and yeah, that definitely is true. It was plenty of food for thought, as you mentioned, but a powerful reminder too, I think, of why equity to health resources and information is so important. And thank you again, Tracy, for that call to arms. It really hit home, a reminder to push collaboration for better health outcomes. So we need a combined effort So that was really great. Thank you, Tracy. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Darren Crouch, Executive Manager, Finance and Reporting, PHN, and he'll be continuing our opening address. Tell us a little bit more about what we are in for tonight. So thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Janice. I am a late call up. We had an apology from Lauren. So my name's Darren Crouch. I work for the Primary Health Network for Hunter New England and Central Coast. My notes have just gone completely out the window. Thanks to Tracy. That the PHN really is the glue or the conduit for bringing people together, for the collaboration. We get Commonwealth funding, we look at needs analysis, and we distribute that money into the best place that we possibly can. And just listening to Tracy, I was just inspired that that there's such a need, there's such a demand in that space when that many people are dying from cancer, and the more that we can do in that space, the better. So I will refer to my notes, but you've just killed it, I think. It's been excellent, absolutely excellent. I hope everyone was inspired by that. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of lands that we are meeting on, the Wabikal and Worimi people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to pass those respects on to any First Nations people here tonight. The good news is that this will be brief. It'll be very brief now, Tracy. Thank you. And I wanted to thank Janice for emceeing tonight and giving up your normal gig to come up here. Thank you for that. The PHN is very pleased to partner with the Cancer Institute New South Wales and the Hunter New England Local Health District for tonight. It's a really impressive lineup. It's a jam-packed program, and I can't believe I almost missed it. So I've got to thank Lauren for that tomorrow. The PHN is very supportive in the culturally and linguistically diverse and cancer screening space. Our CEO called a little earlier. He wanted me to reaffirm our commitment in this area. Same as what Tracy was saying, our sources indicate all of those, the lower rates in the culturally and lower rates of screening in the culturally and linguistically diverse. And due to that there's that population has worse outcomes because they're getting to it much later, or if at all. So that's our research as well, unfortunately. We see the GPs as a crucial to addressing these concerns from our perspective. Our primary care improvement team are working with GPs with additional education on interpreters and the importance of reminding culturally and linguistically diverse populations to do screening. We're also looking to identify, and you mentioned it, Tracy, the multilingual GPs and linking them with multicultural groups. We see that as very critical. The PHN and our partners also have a health literacy program in Armidale, working with the Yazidi refugees. This has been really, really successful. It's really key to improving health outcomes, improving screening. And it's been so successful they've commenced a similar program on the Central Coast, and there's one for the Hunter is coming soon. So that's going well. That's all I really had for tonight. I'm really looking forward to our team sharing more of what they're doing. Really looking forward to learning what everybody else is doing in this space. Please remember, if the night goes well for you, you can let me know. If not so great, please find Phoebe and Amy and let them know. Where's Amy? There she is. And have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren. Really great address. Thank you for coming off the reserves bench. You know, it turned out to be our marquee player. You were fantastic. Thank you. And thanks for being so punchy and pithy with your address. That was great. Really appreciate that too. It's my great pleasure to now introduce Ms. Elizabeth Grist, who is the Executive Director, Clinical Services, Nursing and Midwifery in the Hunter New England Local Health District. She's also responsible for the Multicultural Health Unit, Infection Prevention and Control, and so much more. But it's time to meet her, so please welcome Elizabeth.
They're very hard acts to follow, and I will keep to time. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for that warm welcome, Janice. And thank you very much, Darren. I just want to acknowledge my executive colleague from the PHN. I too would like to acknowledge that I'm privileged to live and work on Awabakal land and pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. A big welcome to Newcastle, Tracy. It's wonderful to have you here, and similar to what Darren said, your data and your statistics were very sobering, so it's something for us all to think about. And thank you to you and your team for initiating and supporting this important event. It's such a wonderful thing that you've started the ball rolling for us tonight on. I would like to also acknowledge my executive colleague Kim Nguyen, who's here this evening. Thank you. And for those who don't know me, my name's Elizabeth Grist, more commonly known as Liz. I'm the Executive Director of Clinical Services and Midwifery, as was outlined, and I lead a very large portfolio which over the last few years has included our COVID response and also population health and those other things that Janice talked about, and also ensuring that we've got a well-trained and resourced nursing and midwifery workforce throughout the district. And we do actually have 10,000 nurses and midwives right across the district, right up to the Queensland border. Another team that I do lead, and I have the great privilege of leading, is the Multicultural and Refugee Health Service. And it's a service that's very dear to my heart, not only because they're a great team to work with, but similarly to your story, my parents were both refugees from World War II, and Dad from Ukraine, Mum from Germany. They tell the story of landing, or Mum actually arrived with two little children to meet Dad, who was already in England. She arrived at Waterloo Station not being able to speak one single word of English, and Dad was at the wrong platform, So she always used to tell me about the kindly people that actually helped her, because it was a matter of hours before they connected, and not being able to speak one word. It always struck me as how frightening and how scary that is. So I am very privileged to lead the Multicultural Health Service, and it's something that is something that I know that we're all really interested in, and cancer screening for CALD people particularly, I can relate to all of those things about stigma and all of those types of issues that were raised, I'm sure we'll hear about tonight. I really would like to thank Ashley Young, who's the service manager of the team, and I think he deserves a round of applause for tonight. He's done a great job. And Trish Owen, the Interpreter Services Manager, and Trish is here somewhere. Yeah, back. And Shingi Chando, who's also here somewhere. Yeah, down the back, yeah. And they're our Multicultural Health Liaison Officers, and for their amazing work supporting our communities and our clinicians in improving access and understanding of our health system. I'm checking my watch, I've got 2 minutes, because I do have to say, throughout COVID, what an extraordinary job that the team did with CALD people. I think it was an exceptional response, and I know Ash really led the way with that throughout the district, so thank you. This is a really important forum. With the assistance of the Primary Health Network, and I thank my colleagues, it's wonderful. I welcome you all here today and thank you for your attendance, particularly as was said on this miserable evening, but we're all brightening it up here. Newcastle and the broader area, particularly Maitland, Tamworth and Armidale, has seen a rapid increase in the diversity of our communities. We know that there are added challenges that are faced here, different from the capital cities. From the 2021 census, I will read quick now, the Newcastle area now has 10.5% of the population that speak a language other than English at home. That consists of 150 languages, though. Think of the enormity of that. It's quite incredible, really. And this increases the importance of the interpreter service, which I know sometimes is difficult and cumbersome for our GPs, and we really want to assist in that respect because we understand that connection and the partnership is vital for you. We also have relatively small numbers of bilingual clinicians. From a patient perspective, language barriers may limit their ability to communicate their health needs, particularly information that's absolutely critical for an accurate health assessment. The patient's understanding of their condition and how to access treatment are also affected. And that's why this forum is so important, and it's wonderful that you're all here. We have an exciting program ahead for you, and I'm excited to hear from all of the speakers. Thid, welcome. I understand you have a beautiful family of health workers here in Newcastle you visit regularly. To start the session tonight with a consumer perspective will be extremely valuable for us all to understand the additional barriers that are faced by migrant communities. Dr. Goodsall, it's great to see you again. The work you and your teams do, along with all our district's gastroenterologists, is so vital in the early identification of many cancers. And Professor Paul, I'm very much looking forward to hearing of the rapidly changing space in research around smoking and smoking cessation. I hope you all enjoy the presentations and the information after dinner. I'm rapid talking now, from the PHN and Cancer Institute on the resources that we have available for you. So don't forget that one. But mostly I hope you all use tonight as an opportunity to network with your colleagues and speakers in the team. How we all work together will improve the care and outcome for all of the communities in our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Really appreciated that address and very generously acknowledging all the other speakers here tonight and what we're in for in terms of what's on the agenda. But thank you so much, and thanks for sharing your personal story too and your connection. And we can see how important this sort of event is and the sort of impact that it has in the community. So thanks again, Liz. And I didn't mind that you went over a minute because it was super interesting, you see, so that was fine. Our next speaker is General Practitioner Dr. Lee Fong. Lee has roles in private general practice along with the Australian Commission for Safety and Quality in Healthcare, Hunter, New England Local Health District, and a host of other networks. Dr. Fong has a particular interest in improving healthcare equity. Please welcome Dr. Fong.
Good evening, everyone. I'd also like to start by acknowledging that the land on which I am standing and live is that of the Awabakal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. There's a bit of a running theme that speakers have a connection to first generation immigrants, and that's no different for me. My parents came to Australia in the early 70s, just pretty much at the end of the White Australia policy. And so it was an interesting landscape that I found myself growing up in. It would also seem to make me a natural fit, perhaps, to be representing in some degree the GP community tonight. I'm not entirely sure that's the case, and I'll explain why in a moment. To harken back to Janice, our presenter, I'm sure everyone's a fan of SBS. Of course, that's the kind of community that we are here. And so I'm sure you're also probably familiar with one of my heroes, Jackie Chan. Yes, I hear a lot of familiarity there. Jackie Chan, the guy who combined martial arts with acrobatics in essentially the first cinematic ninja warrior, basically. And someone that I grew up watching on SBS, Police Story, just to name a few, of his early classics. And I had some innate thought or belief that because we had a shared Chinese heritage, that I should be able to do what he could do. That it was probably genetically endowed on me. And that therefore I should be able to run up vertical walls and jump off 3-story buildings without any trouble. And there was one day when I thought I would try and prove this. I was playing squash with a friend, and I thought I would try and run up the vertical wall at the back of the squash court to get into the spectators' gallery. I failed at that. I did succeed in ripping a chunk out of the medial meniscus of my left knee, though. So I think I definitely disproved any genetic disposition to being like Jackie Chan. Very, very unfortunately for me. It shouldn't be perhaps then any surprise that the fact that I've got straight black hair and small feet, it doesn't particularly endow me with the cultural sensitivity that you might expect from a primary care clinician of my heritage and background. I have not, in fact, in my clinical work, had a lot of experience with people of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. It's the truth. I do, in fact, remember one of my few interactions, going back to, if anyone remembers, this is how far back I had to dig in my memory, to when the Royal Newcastle Hospital just up the road was open. And I was working there as a geriatric CMO. We were looking after patients who were transitioning to nursing home care, and there was one day when a little old Chinese lady came in, and I'm not sure who was more surprised to see the other person, whether it was her seeing me or me seeing her. It's like, what are you doing here? She spoke Cantonese exceptionally well. English, not so much. So the next day when the nurses were trying to establish whether she'd had her bowels open, they struggled. And so they, of course, came to me, thinking that Lee has a Chinese name, he looks Chinese, talks like a duck. He should be able to speak Chinese. I did have a smattering of gossipy Cantonese, gathered by listening to my mum on the phone. But it was pretty limited, but I thought I would have a go. So, this was before the days of Google Translate. What could I do? So I thought I'd sit down and I tried to dredge up some Cantonese from the recesses of my brain. And so it started off with me going, are there any Cantonese speakers here tonight? Oh no. Okay, well, if you start laughing hysterically when I try to speak Cantonese, then I will not take offence because that is the usual reaction. So it started off with me trying to remember how do I say this? Yao mo or si. No response, just blank look. The typical response I get from people listening to me try to speak Chinese, besides the hysterical laughter. So I fell into the classic mistake of then thinking that if I said it louder, it would obviously be more understandable. Yao mo or si. Nothing, still. Okay, time to bring out the sign language. Yao mo or si. At which point she got it. Okay, thanks mostly to the sign language and not to my butchering of the Chinese language. However, she was able to tell me that she had, in fact, had a perfectly normal bowel motion that morning. So everyone was happy with that. She was also able to tell me that And I did understand enough Chinese to get this. I should never use those words again. Because I thought I had said to her, excuse me, but have you had a bowel motion this morning? In fact, was more in line with, oh, have you had a shit? So in that case, a small cultural faux pas, but no harm done. The next culturally diverse interaction I had was not nearly as amusing, unfortunately. I was in my general practice, and somebody who came in who was had recently settled in Newcastle from a refugee background. Her English was about as good as my Cantonese, so we had to use a translator. And the enduring memory I have of that consultation was a combination of frustration mixed with a tinge of despair, really. This patient had come in with a significant iron deficiency anemia, having already been reviewed by one of my colleagues at the practice. So I was the second GP that she'd seen. And it was quite clear that there hadn't been a follow-through for the plan that had been instigated, or my colleague had thought that they'd instigated. We spent the next maybe 10 minutes with the telephone translator with me trying to reconfirm aspects of the story. And I have a memory that I spent the next 10 minutes after that becoming utterly confused, because the elements of the history that I was then getting seemed to quite entirely contradict what I got in the first 10 minutes. So I was left really not quite sure what to do. And so I fell back on the original management plan and tried to go through what that plan was to try and work out why it hadn't been followed through. And I could see the words that were coming back from the translator were, yes, 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 I understand, I'll do it. And the body language was saying something entirely different. And I have to admit also at this point, and a nod to what Tracy was saying earlier about the pressures on general practice, my anxiety was mounting not only because I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere, that this was not a collaborative approach that was going to result in a positive outcome, but also because I had patients waiting outside. And what was a 15-minute consultation had turned into a 30-minute consultation, was turning into a 45-minute consultation. And I was bulk billing this patient. And the only reason I could bulk bill this patient was because she was being subsidised by the private billing patients that were waiting outside and getting more upset, probably. And so there was that pressure happening as well. It's not an excuse, it's just an acknowledgement of the reality of general practice. And that was many years ago. It's worse now. So at the end, what did we have? We had a consultation that was entirely unsatisfactory. It's worse than that. It was, if I was being gentle, I'd say it was suboptimal. It was actually an appalling outcome. So I come before you with a multicultural heritage, but clearly close to zero expertise in the area. And so, like many of you, I've simply come to learn from the true experts tonight, and I look forward to that. And I look forward to that because, you know, I could spend the next 10,000 hours in a gym and I would never come close to what Jackie Chan can do. But I hope in the next couple of hours, I'll be much better equipped to be able to provide to my patients of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds the kind of care that they all deserve, without exception.
Thank you, Dr. Fong. That was very, very heartfelt and, yeah, lovely personal connection. I really appreciate you sharing those stories with us tonight. Wonderful perspective on multicultural healthcare, deep connection that you have, and that, as I say, that lived experience that you've had, and also a bit of your connection to Jackie Chan, bit of pantomime, bit of stand-up comedy with the Cantonese. Really appreciate that, and thank you. That was really heartfelt and very meaningful. Thanks again. Our first session is on cold patient experiences with GPs and service access. And on that note, I'd love to introduce you now to Mrs. Nhan Thit Tue, who is the founder and chair of Sisters Cancer Support Group Incorporated, SCSG. It's an Illawarra-based non-for-profit organisation. Thit has come a long way to join us tonight, and as Tracy mentioned, fortunately, it's been worth the trip, I think, because you've got to visit some family along the way, but it's our great pleasure to have Thit join us tonight. Welcome. And she always looks fabulous, can I say? Sorry, Ned, I just need to put this back up. And then she'll click on. Which one do I click? Stay. You come over here.
Thank you very much, Janice, for the introduction. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I live and work, and pay my respects to elders, past, present, and future. Professor Tracy, Liz, and distinguished guests, thank you so much for having me here today. To be quite honest, when I was first asked to talk about this topic, I was really, really petrified, because what can this little Asian woman talk about are very qualified GPs and nurses, right? But the reality is, whenever we have any health problems, the GPs and the community nurses are the ones that they are our first call. Why? Because we really trust you guys, and we truly believe that you can make us feel better, right? So I'm here today because I truly believe that primary health care providers play a very, very important role in supporting people across the cancer control. And also because Shetel's and Ashley's encouragements to me and to talk about my own experience, and how the cancer support group that I founded is now helping multicultural women in Wollongong. So I thought I'll share my own cancer story and the story of a Burmese refugee lady that I'm helping now. But I'm going to present the stories as a case study, because I was advised that if it is presented as a case study, it resonates better with the professionals. Is that right? So tonight, my aim is to shine light on the difficulties and issues some multicultural patients have, and that may resonate with you, and hopefully, through reflection, you may be inspired to resolve those issues. So when we talk about cancer, it's very complicated, isn't it? It's because, as you can see on the slides, it can be about referral for testing and screening, or complexity of treatment steps, comorbidities that can happen, psychological and emotional issues. So as a cancer patient, you have to go through a range of steps, and also with a lot of different primary healthcare professionals. So navigating through this system is quite daunting, even for someone like me, who can speak up, negotiate, and make informed decision of my own treatments. So let's start with case study number 1. I was born, brought up, and educated in Myanmar, migrated to Australia in my late 20s. So my background is up there, and my cancer treatments are up there. And I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2019. It was a stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma. which was right at the back of my chest wall. And if I had not listened to my GP and did the screening, it would have never been found. So my regular screening found it and detected, and that really saved my life, right? So up till now, I still rely a lot on my GP, Dr. James Koo. He's been my GP for well over 30 years, for my family doctor, right? And it was so helpful for me to have James' support and guidance throughout all my cancer treatment, because he understands my needs and my little cultural nuances and things like that, right? So when I do all my tests, biopsy, MRIs, and CT scans, all of that, I requested that the results be sent to James, because I want my GP to be fully informed of all the stages and have all the details of my situation. And that really helped. So it went well, but when I finished my treatment, I found that it was very hard for me. I felt very let down and lost, because everybody was telling me that, hey, you don't have any more cancer, you're okay, go and lead a normal life. But I'm not okay at all. You see, I'm a totally different person, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I did have to go through a lot of trouble and difficulties in my treatment. So, for example, like having to make the biggest decision on whether I will take chemotherapy or not. Or like when chemotherapy completely wiped out my immune system, within 3 days, whether to continue with it or not. Those sort of difficult decisions that I have to make. And also having to deal with some prejudices and preconceived ideas that leads to dismissive attitudes and inequity in care provision, specifically at the private hospital that I was in. So since then, now, I chose to be a private patient in a public hospital, period, right? So, but then after treatment, other things happen like neuropathy, side effects of tamoxifen, anxiety attacks, depressions, all that sets in. And James, being a very conventional doctor, he would always prescribe me pills for these things. And I've had enough of medication and pills. So I started to read a lot and educate myself on how to live well with cancer. So naturally, I followed my instincts and I sought out Dr. Lyon. Now, he's a progressive doctor, GP, because he also embraces integrative medicine and lifestyle medicine. So with God's blessing and a lot of help and support from my ICCC staff at Wollongong and my 2 trusted GPs, I'm alive and well down the track, 10 years down the track. So I'm here today. All right. But unfortunately, it wasn't the same for my refugee friend. She had spent decades in the refugee camp, Burmese Thai border refugee camp, before she was allowed in as a refugee. Only one thing that I have in common with her is that we both have lived cancer experience. And because she comes from a completely different background, she has had many insurmountable problems and issues. Now, Multicultural Community Council of Illawarra alerted me to her plight. And on my first visit, I found that she was a widow living with her mentally compromised daughter who has an autistic child. She lives in a housing commission area, and her house, her flat was so dirty and hardly any furniture there at all. She had one broken old fridge. So I think because of her very poor English, her first GP misdiagnosed her problem as stomach ulcer and proceeded with the treatment for about a year. Only when things got worse and through her insistence, she was sent to a specialist who then diagnosed it as stage 4 stomach cancer. The specialist gave her a picture of internal organs with a cross on the stomach, and that's how she found out where her cancer was. And she had no idea what the operation entails, nor anything about the chemotherapy and the effects it would have. and she also have no transport to and from ICCC for chemo and radiation. So with the help of her daughter and a friend of hers, we clean up her unit, found a small working bar fridge for her, bought cleaning stuff, and show how to wipe down and clean the communal bathroom she has when she starts chemo. And I also linked her to ISLET, Multicultural and Refugee Health Services, for regular community nurse to visit her, and found her a Burmese-speaking GP who can explain things better to her, vice versa. And I also accompany her to when she ever has a specialist appointment. So after several more hospitalization, now she's living with the PEG tube, and she thinks that would come off one day, and I just don't have the heart to tell her that this may not be the case. She still comes to my cancer support group meeting with the help of a community worker, and with a lot of support and help, she is living relatively well with her cancer. Now, you will notice that I used two very different cancer journeys, because I want to highlight the fact that even in a small community, like a Burmese community, it is the vulnerable ones, those with poor health literacy and poor education, are the ones we really need to look out for and focus our attention on. And a lot of thought and energy needs to be put for these vulnerable multicultural cancer patients from lower socioeconomic group backgrounds, the elderlies, the LGBT group, and those who are in the rural area, etc., because that's where cancer support services are quite scarce. So we really need to act smart and think smart in the provision of shared cancer care services, service delivery to these people. So why don't we muster in the community cancer support groups like us? Mobilize them so that they have some shared ownership and become supportive allies to the primary healthcare sector and not just mere consumers. So in Wollongong, Sister Cancer Support Group has been working for nearly 9 years, but not alone. We work very closely and collaboratively and in partnership with ISLET, Cancer Institute, Multicultural Multicultural Health Services, and MCCI. And our monthly support group sessions and events and activities are based on Essence of Health holistic model, which was advocated by Dr. Craig Hassard from Monash University. He gave us permission to adapt it to make it more culturally appropriate and inclusive for our ladies. And this evidence-based model teaches us how to take care of ourselves, to improve our health, and live well with cancer. So what do? We educate the ladies on cancer and self-care strategies, give them support and a safe space to share and learn how to manage stress. We encourage spirituality as well, because that's very important to be able to live with grace and strength. We promote exercise. We do Qigong every time we meet, and we do tricycling. Would you believe that? Yes, we do tricycling. And we also demonstrate on healthy food and things like that, and give them a space so that they feel connected and the sense of belongingness. And we also teach them how important it is to have clean living environments, because they really impact on our physical and mental health. So these are basic essential things, but we really need to know how to do these things to be healthy and cancer-free. So there are many multicultural cancer support groups in the community. Check them out in your area. And I think Cancer Council has a whole list of where they are and what they do. Okay, so next one is, yes, we have a lot of emphasis on food, because you are what you eat. And by sharing food, we really unite. It unites us, right? And I truly, personally believe that healthy diet and lifestyle and regular checkups are very, very important to have a healthy mind and healthy body. This is my lifestyle medicine, actually. So, I like to close by just reiterating what Tracy has said, that the New South Wales Cancer Plan really recognizes the significant role the primary healthcare sector plays in patient care across various stages of the cancer continuum. And the Cancer Institute Primary Healthcare Cancer Framework that was launched in 2021, right, Tracy? Is full of clear direction, structure, and useful resources that would strengthen collaboration and improve cancer control outcomes. So, best wishes to everyone. Good luck to everyone in your collaboration, consulting, cooperating, and co-delivering the shared cancer care to multicultural communities and cancer patients. Thank you. I hope I haven't gone over time.
Thank you so much, Thit. Isn't she amazing? Another round of applause for Thit. Oh my goodness, I can tell you that was worth the trip as far as I'm concerned, from down the south coast to Newcastle. Thank you so much for generously giving us that deep insight into your personal story, your experience, and also your Burmese friend. I mean, chalk and cheese really, and really important to hear that lived experience once again, to hear about the genuine roadblocks that face people out there and the difficulties faced by cold communities. We wish you very good health too, Thit. I hope you're feeling okay. That's, yeah, wonderful to hear that you're in great health these days. Next time, can I give you one bit of advice, please? You did amazingly. You look worried. You showed us photos of you serving food. We need samples next time. Okay, I think we're going to have to relocate the Hunter Health stuff down south just so we can have... But that's my only tip for you. The rest of it was absolute top-notch. Thank you for that. But sampled next time. Anyway, folks, you might want to have a think about how you're going to contribute to this conversation. Maybe you've already submitted some questions over Slido. We will be taking some of those questions soon, so keep thinking about it. Our next speaker is Dr. Tom Goodsall, a staff specialist, gastroenterologist at John Hunter Hospital and VMO at Alice Springs Hospital, with a subspecialty interest in inflammatory bowel disease, bowel cancer prevention, and the microbiome. He recently established and now leads the fecal microbiota transplant service, and I know you're dying to know what that involves. Thank you, Dr. Tom.
All right, thank you. I would also like to acknowledge that I stand, live and work on Awabakal land and pay my respect to elders past, present and future. I think most of you have finished dinner, and I promise my slides are fairly clean, but we'll keep an eye on it. I would like to begin by saying thank you to the Cancer Institute of New South Wales, the Hunter New England Multicultural Health Services and the Health Pathways team and Sandra Fitzgerald for the invitation to speak, and also some assistance in collecting and collating the data and these slides. I would also like to offer a disclaimer, which is that I do not consider myself an expert in multicultural health at all. I have a strong interest in it, and I believe in equitable healthcare, and I enjoy taking the opportunity when it's presented to educate myself by asking my patients how I can best meet their needs and how I can be better at understanding them and their culture. And so I was very humbled to be asked to speak here tonight amongst other experts who, and also everyone here who is also showing a great interest and is an ally and supports this great cause. So I'd like to begin with a study. This was a patient who I saw quite recently in clinic, and it was just as I was thinking about what slides I was going to put together, so it was a fortuitous encounter. This patient, JP, was a 49-year-old man. He was a refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo and a single father of 2 high school-aged children. JP had suffered a gunshot wound at the age of 2 and had extensive damage to the sciatic nerve in his leg and also an amputation of his foot. My understanding was that he had had several hospitalisations as a child, and he had some features of trauma stemming from these hospitalisations. He did not go into it in much detail, but this was definitely a barrier to engaging him in the healthcare service. He spoke no English, but did speak Lingala and Swahili. And his referral was for new onset of rectal bleeding and a family history of a sister who had died from a bowel cancer in her 30s, so quite a concerning referral. He was referred to the gastro clinics in October of 2020, and his referral was triaged as urgent, as it should have been. Due to various factors, his first appointment offered was in October, 2 years later, and he did not attend that appointment. The appointment notifications go out in English in written mail. His next appointment available was February of 23, and he attended this appointment. He came without any family members who spoke English, but we did have a Swahili interpreter available via video telehealth. So again, a situation where we did not have an interpreter in the room, which I find as a clinician a significant barrier. He was consented to a colonoscopy and was given bowel preparation instructions. Again, we did not have any language-specific instructions for this patient, but his teenage son, was able to translate those instructions for him. And he had some anaesthetic concerns stemming mostly from his experience. He wanted to be awake, but to feel nothing. That can be difficult, particularly on a public list where I can't control the anaesthetist who's present. He did come to colonoscopy, and I can tell you his prep was better than any other John Hunter patient I've ever seen. It was perfect. He followed it to the letter. His anaesthetic encounter was excellent. I was lucky enough that the anaesthetist on that day was one that I work with frequently, and we were able to accommodate him, go at his pace, and provide an excellent anaesthetic that he was happy with as well. And he was actually very, very comfortable and pleased after the procedure. Happily, he did not have any bowel lesions, and in this case it was hemorrhoidal bleeding, but you can imagine that the story could have been very different if there was a significant lesion at the time of the referral. So I think that story highlights some of the issues that I see in day-to-day practice and we're all aware of, and I've already discussed tonight with regards to the challenges we face in cancer management, but particularly bowel cancer screening is what I'm talking about. There's difficulty in engaging patients in faecal occult blood testing participation. There can be issues around primary care access and attendance. We've heard from Lee his personal story about having translators on the telephone and some of the challenges involved in that. There can be cultural factors such as interpretation of symptoms and also engagement with the healthcare facility and system. The healthcare system is complex and confusing. I think it's complex and confusing. I often don't understand how it works, and I don't understand how some patients come and see me quickly and others wait a long time. It's challenging, and for patients who speak a language other than English and come from different cultures, this must be infinitely more so. We have issues around health literacy and also financial issues. For some people, taking a day off from casual work to come in for a clinic appointment and then 2 days off for a procedure is financially impossible. And there is no support for these patients in many cases. There are significant delays all through the public health system. There's a lack of advocacy for this group, and I don't think we have enough data. So if we talk about data, I suppose the first question is there a problem? And in preparing this talk, I asked for what data we had. We know that bowel cancer is the second highest cause of cancer mortality in Australia, and it affects 1 in 16 people by the age of 85. We do have a national bowel cancer screening program which has been up and running fully for 3 years now. This sends out free bowel cancer kits to all Australians from the age of 50 every 2 years until they reach 74. The reason for this is that bowel cancer is often asymptomatic in the early stages, and can be treated with the aim to cure if identified early. And we know New South Wales participation rates are around 40%. If we look down more granularly at our local health network and some of the areas around here, everyone's reasonably similar, but there is a bit of a spread. I think leading the charge are Port Stephens, the Mid-Coast, Lake Macquarie, perhaps demographically some more affluent and homogenous areas, and also quite local and close to major health centres, comparing perhaps to Narrabri and Moree Plains, geographically isolated, facing the tyranny of distance. We see a lot lower participation in fecal occult blood testing in these groups. We know also that Australians who spoke a language other than English at home had lower bowel screening participation rates, somewhere around 2/3 to as low as half as many in these groups. And a number of barriers have been identified, which I've laid out. So if we look perhaps at some of the data we have for Indigenous Australians comparing Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups, we see a lower participation rate in bowel cancer screening, a slightly higher positivity at screening, but a lower rate of patients who go on to have a colonoscopy and a longer time to colonoscopy in Indigenous versus non-Indigenous Australians. Whilst the rates of bowel cancer are very similar once diagnosed in these groups, we see a much higher mortality rate amongst Indigenous Australians compared to non-Indigenous, which is probably in part due to later diagnoses and more advanced cancers, as well as access to services and oncology. This is the data available, and this is based on 2016 census data, and it's 2023. And as I was looking through this, one of my initial thoughts was that there's a PhD sitting here in how much data we don't have and how little understanding we have of the real issues in culturally and linguistically diverse groups in Australia. If we look at the same 2016 census data, which has been extrapolated based on language spoken at home, so those who spoke a language other than English at home compared to English speakers, we see similar results, but we have very little data on cancer rates and cancer mortality. It just doesn't exist. We don't know. So I think, is there a problem? The clinical epidemiologist in me says we don't have enough reliable data. I think the denominators in what I've shown you are much smaller than they are in reality, and there's a huge role for more research in this area and a demand for it as well. Everyone's finished dinner, so I can segue briefly, very briefly, to the microbiome, because I think it's really important in the discussion tonight. I have a vested interest. This is, well, does anyone recognise what that is? It's poo. It's poo. It's TGA approved poo, and it's very high quality. It often comes from AFL players in Adelaide. So we've introduced a fecal transplant service primarily for Clostridium difficile treatment at John Hunter Hospital with full clinical governance approval and support from the Pharmacy Department and Quality Use of Medicines. It's not glamorous, but it is an excellent treatment for C. diff. But the microbiome more broadly is really important. I think it's one of the main areas of interest in the 21st century. We've moved on from the human genome and now it's all about the biome. The biome's diverse, and Phoebe's going to kick my kneecaps in if I take too long speaking about it, but it far outnumbers our own body cells and our own genetic mass. We don't understand a lot of the biome, and we have not characterised a lot of the species that are present in our biome, and we don't understand the function of a lot of them. But it does impact on our health significantly, both through products of metabolism and also through genetic and epigenetic factors and influences. The microbiome's dynamic. It changes over our lives. It changes from the moment we're born via the mode we're delivered and our gestational age. It can be affected by antibiotic exposures, our household exposures, definitely by our diet. Illness, whether we have or don't have an appendix, many host immune and genetic factors, and even our diurnal rhythm and shift work, I'm sure pretty relevant for some here. The biome is complex, and this is a nice example of how culture and race can affect our biome. It was identified that a diet rich in soy in Japanese populations improved cardiovascular health, reduced osteoporosis, reduced prostate cancer risk, and reduced the risk of heart attack and stroke. The reason for this was essentially because of a byproduct of metabolism by a bacteria. So the enzyme to make this S-equal, which has all these great effects, is not a human enzyme. It comes from the microbiome. Now, this microbiome that makes this enzyme is relatively specific to Asian populations. So whilst it's found in more than half of Asian adults, it's only found in 25% of Western adults. And so if we look at the signal for a soy diet benefit, it is very much limited to Asian adults. And so when it comes to microbiome, we can't make generalizations. We have to look at culture, geography, and racial differences as well in the biome. If we talk about bowel cancer, the diet that we eat influences our biome in very measurable and clear ways. It's a busy slide, and I won't labour the details, but we know that if we eat a lot of meat, particularly red meat, processed meats and animal fat, we see a shift in the microbiome to a number of organisms that are inflammatory and cause epigenetic changes and produce harmful secondary bile acids that are all carcinogenic. And we see an increase in bowel cancer risk. On the flip side, a diet that's high in whole grains, vegetables and fruits, so things that look like they did when they come out of the ground, which is what I tell every patient when they ask what they should eat, has very favourable effects on the gut. It produces more butyrate, which is essential for colonocyte function, and we see a decrease in cancer risk. So there are a number of organisms there. If anyone wants to talk microbiology, we can talk later. But we know that a diet that's high in fibre, which is eaten by a number of migrant populations when compared to an average Australian diet, does lower the rates of bowel cancer. There are any number of reasons for this and any number of reasons why all of you should look at your own diets as well. When we eat more fibre, we have more stool bulk, which decreases the concentration of carcinogens. There's also a decreased carcinogen exposure because our guts work better and they move faster. Butyrate is incredibly important. It's important for colonocyte function, but it also induces apoptosis and it has epigenetic effects that will inhibit tumour growth. And we rely on firmicute species in particular for healthy gut function. This was demonstrated in a very elegant study, although in a small group, performed by O'Keefe and his research group. The researchers noted that the bowel cancer incidence was 13 times higher in African Americans compared to rural Africans. And when they took a population of rural Africans and they switched them to a diet that was typical of African Americans, so a typical Western diet, they saw shifts in the microbiome. They saw more harmful bacteria. They saw decreased butyrate production, increased production of secondary bile acids, and the Ki-67 index of the colonocytes went up, which is a marker of cell turnover and an increased risk for tumorigenesis. The reverse was true as well. When they switched the diet of African Americans to a more typical rural African diet, within 2 weeks they saw the reverse changes. So 2 weeks of a change in diet will immediately affect your bowel cancer risk. I think that's quite confronting, really. So if we return to bowel cancer screening, because we're in Australia, there's a neon fast food joint on every corner. It's accessible, that's the cheapest food. The more processed the food, the cheaper it is. The National Bowel Cancer Screening Program is an excellent cancer screening program. It's made really significant differences and it's allowed diagnosis of early cancers which are treatable and curable. It's been fully implemented for 3 years and everyone gets a test kit in the mail. If you're on the Medicare register, you get your test kit. And hopefully at least those who have received those here tonight have tested. If they haven't, you can go and see your GP and we'll talk about how to get you onto the program. There is an alternative access model now, which is one of the things I really want to talk about and highlight tonight. primary care health practitioners and GPs can now enrol their patients directly onto the program and provide them with test kits. It's done via the National Cancer Screening Register, and there is a healthcare provider portal. The one caveat is it does require training. I know no one has enough online training in their life, but if you can do the training, you can access and bulk order test kits and then enrol your patients. And this is an opportunity, particularly when we're talking about culturally and linguistically diverse groups and how we can support them. It is essentially the case that the primary care providers and GPs are needing to do the bulk of the heavy lifting here, but it is an important thing to be doing. We also have assistance from Health Pathways, and I think Sandra is going to speak to this later, so I'm not going to labour the point or steal her thunder. But the Health Pathways have been laid out and are very, very accessible. And there's a nice little flag up in the top corner there with lots of different countries' flags on it. If you click on that, you get lots of translations for information about bowel cancer screening and also colonoscopy information. I didn't quite add up all the languages available, but it was just about everything. Even Health Pathways recommend a diet that's high in fibre and low in highly processed food and meat. So there are some changes that we are making to access. We know it has been a huge issue locally in the Hunter New England Health District getting access to GI services and colonoscopy. We are expanding our colonoscopy direct access program so that patients are not waiting for clinic appointments. We've also made significant initiatives and seen an increase in funding for waitlist management and more recently a service expansion with nurse practitioners and more rapid access clinics. I do want to say that communication does remain essential, and again, we need to be communicating with our primary care physicians, GPs, and asking them that in their referrals, particularly for patients who are linguistically and culturally diverse, that more information in the referral does make it easier to triage and see these patients. But we also need to safety net this group because they are more likely to be vulnerable, more likely to be facing a system that is challenging and difficult to understand. I'm always so pleased to take a phone call. Anyone who's concerned about a patient, I'd love to hear about them because we can always slide them in somewhere. We have rapid access clinics. And for someone with red flags, if you feel that they're not being seen fast enough, they're probably not being seen fast enough, and we can often do something about it. I think there are ongoing challenges and there are wicked problems. I don't say this to be pessimistic, but I think it's important to start a dialogue around what we still have to do and what we have to deal with. I've mentioned already the need for more data collection and more visibility of multicultural groups. I think that's so important in driving future change and improvement to services. There's always need of funding, and we're just fighting every other group for more funding. But we could always use more. Equitable access to healthcare. I think this is so important. In Australia, we face a tyranny of distance. We know that your geography and your proximity to major centres influences your access to all sorts of healthcare services. For me, it's really around access to colonoscopy. And there's a huge inequity in Australia. We need to understand, and this has been spoken about already, that healthcare occurs in a linguistically diverse setting. And I think we can always be doing more. We need more translator services, more written information that's translated, and just better understanding and willingness to try and understand the issues. There are system pressures. There are always going to be system pressures. And the system pressures, I think, trickle down to pressures on individual health practitioners. We've heard how pressured primary healthcare is and how pressured GPs are. And the same is the case in the hospital. My rapid access clinic is double booked for 20-minute appointments. So when I see patients with a translator over video health, I have the same problem. I've got patients waiting outside, all of whom have been waiting a long time for their appointment. We're seeing a growing multicultural representation in our healthcare providers. I think we have a long way to go, but we're doing better every year. And it means that there are more advocates in the healthcare system for our culturally diverse and linguistically diverse patients. And there are more people in the health system who can teach those around them and who we can learn from. And we need to identify champions and allies, and I think everyone here tonight attending and watching is a champion and an ally, so thank you. I'll finish on that note, and I think we have a Q&A coming up very soon.
Thank you, Dr. Goodsall, for that, offering that really engaging and thoughtful insight there. That was really, really great. Some of the challenges obviously facing your patients as well as medical professionals like yourself. I think that the gaps that the doctor talked to there, the lack of advocacy and support really highlights that there's still a lot of work to be done, isn't there? And a bit of extra funding wouldn't go astray as well. If anyone's got deep pockets out there, you talk to Dr. Goodsall. I'm sure he'll point you in a good direction. And also, thank you for giving us an insight too into your work around the microbiome. You know, that's not usually what we discuss over dinner. So, yeah, it's was absolutely fascinating. So thank you for that. Again, if you have questions, a good time to think about it. Maybe hop onto that Slido app and see if your question might shoot to the top. If you can get some support, that'd be great. Now, friends, it's time to talk about smoking, believe it or not. Professor Christine Paul is a behavioural researcher and head of research for the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Newcastle, a great university it is, I might say. I used to go there myself. Chris has led research in tobacco control for a number of years, exploring issues around understanding and managing distress, stigma and the financial impacts of that. So I know she's very passionate about what she does, and it's a great pleasure to have her join us tonight. Please welcome Professor Christine Paul.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak tonight. And I hope that I'll be able to manage the system. Okay. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where I live and work, the Awabakal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend those respects to any Aboriginal people in the meeting tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge that I don't come with a diverse cultural heritage, but what I do come with is experience as a researcher where many times I was writing my funding applications or my ethics applications and saying no to the called box, saying, no, we can't afford to do that. That's too hard, that's impractical. Our study participants are going to be people who can cope with reading the consent materials in English. And then sitting on many ethics committees and seeing many other researchers doing exactly the same thing and recognising that that's just not good enough, that's not fair, that's not equitable, and we need to do better. So while I can't claim to have fixed that, I'm certainly working towards it. So in talking about smoking cessation tonight, I need to acknowledge that it's not simple, and that's why my title starts with the idea that it's an intricate game. So just to give you a nice graph to start off with, the green line there is the proportion of people who speak English at home who smoke tobacco daily. And so that line is higher than the blue line below it, which is the proportion of people who speak a language other than English at home. So you'd say, okay, well, that's a good thing that those households where they're not speaking English at home, they've got lower smoking rates. Isn't that a good thing, a win? Well, I guess what I wanted to draw your attention to tonight is with that red circle and a little red asterisk, that while the smoking rates for the broader population in Australia are steadily going down, they're a bit erratic in the cold populations, and in fact they seem to be increasing. But that's just a broad overview. If we look a little bit closer to particular populations within those groups, we see, if we look at the proportion of people smoking who are Australian born, it's just over 15%. But then for a lot of culturally and linguistically diverse groups, it's lower than that. The only ones that come up as higher are people born in New Zealand or Oceania, and those born in North Africa and the Middle East. But then when we look a little bit deeper again, the story is even trickier, if you like. So if we look at subpopulations, particularly thinking about women versus men, the smoking rates for some groups are much higher in men than they are for women, and so those lower rates mask the fact that there may be a high proportion of men in that population who are smokers. There are some groups of women in Australia who have relatively high smoking rates, and those are Pacifica women, those from New Zealand and some parts of the UK, and there are some groups where it's lower than the general English-speaking population, and that's women from East Asia and Southeast Asia. If we think a bit about those men with higher rates, they're particularly men with Vietnamese backgrounds, Chinese backgrounds, and Arabic-speaking backgrounds, where there I've suggested it might be a third or a half for some of those groups, but there are data that suggest that it's even higher. And we also know that it's higher in men who were born in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East than it is in people who were born in Australia. So we also need to bear in mind that beyond the traditional combustible cigarettes, there are other types of tobacco products that need to be part of the conversation around smoking when we're talking to people from some of those backgrounds, particularly water pipe and shisha, and there's lots of other names for that as well, but particularly among Arabic speakers, that's quite popular, and up to 11% of some of those groups use shisha daily. And also smokeless tobacco, particularly for chewing or parking in the cheek, those sorts of things. In some communities like Southeast Asian communities, it's up to 17% of those groups who use smokeless tobacco. And in some countries like India, it's just as common, if not more common, than the use of cigarettes. Then when we look at how that relates to cancer incidence and mortality, we know that all cancer incidence is higher for some groups than for others, and so I've listed some of those there, and that's partly related to smoking. And even beyond diagnosis, there are also some variations that relate to country of birth. So if we look at rates of treatment and rates of survival for non-small cell lung cancer, which has a strong relationship to smoking, there are variations there by country of birth that suggests that impact from smoking carries through even if people quit at diagnosis, that it continues to be an issue that we need to be mindful of and give those people an opportunity to be supported to quit. And this is just reinforcing that point a little. That yellow bar in the middle is the mortality to incidence ratio for cancer for Australian-born populations, and on the left you can see some of those higher smoking groups have higher mortality rates. So when I put all of that together from those previous slides, my pitch to you is that we need a really consistent and tailored set of smoking cessation programs for CALD groups so that it's fair and they get every opportunity to quit and get the best health outcomes. In order to do that, though, there are lots of conversations that need to be had, whether that's in primary care or elsewhere, and there are some things that we need to bear in mind. So firstly, in terms of perceptions about tobacco, we know that some of those products that are used, like water pipe and smokeless tobacco, are perceived by some of those users to have a relatively low risk of cancer. And so they think, well, at least I'm not smoking those terrible cigarettes, I'm just using a water pipe. But we know that they are linked to various types of cancer quite significantly, and I've listed some of those there. Alongside that, people have been quite clear in expressing their scepticism about the health risks of some things like smokeless tobacco and water pipe, and they often report a sense that those health effects are off in the distant future, so I don't need to worry too much about them. I might not be terribly happy with the cost of it, or the fact that it smells a bit, or that it gives me a bit of a problem with coughing. But perhaps my current enjoyment is much more important, and so that outweighs those fairly distant future risks, and so it's not high on my agenda to quit. So that's one set of things that need to be part of the conversation. Another set of things are the social context that this happens in, and many people bring with them the influences of their country of origin or it stays within their communities. And that's often impacted by high prevalence of smoking in those countries or communities. So it's a very normal kind of thing, which is not as much the case for people who've been in Australia for a very long time, where we've had lots of anti-tobacco messages, campaigns and warnings. And if you take something like someone who's come from India, where they've used smokeless tobacco, often those sorts of products are available loose in a marketplace where there literally is no packaging with a health warning on it. So that's a different level of understanding and expectation around the health risks of products that they may well come with. And we also know that culture and family and communal practices are much more attuned or aligned to smoking and using tobacco products for some particular groups, where things like hospitality, courtesy and generosity are related to the sharing of tobacco or doing those things like smoking water pipe together. And so when those conversations need to be had around quitting smoking, there's that extra layer of getting someone's head, a person having to get their head around, how do I continue to be that hospitable, generous, courteous person without that kind of ritual around smoking, or without doing those things together with my family and my community. Another point I'd like to raise around smoking, this data doesn't come from culturally and linguistically diverse groups, it comes from the mainstream. And I do think, though, it raises a couple of things that we need to bear in mind when talking about smoking and quitting smoking for people who are diagnosed with lung cancer. And it's particularly those grey boxes that I'd like to draw your attention to, where we know that because of the stigma, that sense of shame and blame around, because I was a smoker, that's the reason why I have lung cancer, and so it's partly my fault, that can result in some behavioural approaches like delaying seeking medical help, so perhaps being diagnosed a bit later than you otherwise would have been, having a reluctance to use support services, and perhaps even feeling like you don't deserve them or have a right to them, and so feeling unworthy of treatment, and even having that sense of nihilism, that there's no point, you know, the game's over, I've got cancer, it's my fault, and I'll just quietly suffer away with it and not bother with treatment or with support. So I think what that means is, if you're in that context of having discussions around quitting smoking and accessing cancer care, that it's really important to bring the evidence into play and make it clear exactly what people's risks and benefits are from quitting smoking, but also to come from the perspective of a supportive ally rather than a judge, because people do very much feel judged or that they might be judged around smoking. So to have that approach that says something like, it's really important for you, for your health and for your, for example, coping with your cancer treatment, if you can quit smoking. And what I'd like to do is help you with that as much as I can. So it's about doing this together rather than telling people to go off and quit by themselves. So is it the case that people from culturally and linguistically diverse groups who smoke, are they given every opportunity to quit? I know for the broader community, and I've been banging on about this for many years in many contexts, that we've pushed the idea that it needs to be raised in all sorts of health consultation and people given the opportunity to quit. But I'm not so sure that, even though that's not perfect for the wider community, I tend to think that perhaps for CALD groups, they have even less opportunity to get that support and help and advice and information that will get them further ahead in that really challenging action of quitting. So of course, if they use something like cigarettes, they're going to see those warnings, and they might see posters and tobacco campaigns for the general community. So they do have that access to a degree, depending on where they live and what they who they interact with. They might see other very specific campaigns, like some that have been run in particularly Western Sydney and Southwestern Sydney in recent years, such as the Shisha No Thanks project and the Quit and Win work that was for particularly Vietnamese and Southeast Asian communities. So those things do happen, but I think there's a really big question mark over what else happens. So what's the journey like if you are from a culturally and linguistically diverse group around every time you see a healthcare provider, whether that's a GP or a nurse or an allied health practitioner, or you're diagnosed with cancer and you're talking to your oncologist, do you get the same advice? Do you get the same access to support as someone who speaks English or has an English-speaking background? Well, the answer is we don't know. We don't have that kind of information in Australia today, despite being one of the most intensive tobacco control research communities in the world. So there is some good news, though, that we do know that there are effective cessation interventions for culturally and linguistically diverse groups. This is a table from a rapid evidence review that was done for the Sachs Institute last year, and they were looking internationally at the evidence for what works for various different language-speaking groups. And you can see by the green ticks, for Chinese-speaking populations, there's a reasonable sense that we do have effective interventions to help people quit. So written information like a brochure gets a tick. Having education, whether that be one-on-one or in a group, helps. Having visual information like a video or a graphic that relates to your language and culture helps. Counselling works, and that can include things like the multilingual quit line that we have in New South Wales. Also, having a family member or a friend involved, and using nicotine replacement therapy and most likely other pharmacotherapies as well. Those sorts of things work. Those are available here in Australia, so those are things that we should be connecting people with and helping them with. Less information for other groups like Vietnamese-speaking people and Arabic-speaking participants, but I think it's pretty reasonable to offer CALD people the same kind of supports that are there for English-speaking people, particularly around written information and using things like the I Can Quit website and referring people to the multilingual quit line. So this is just a little example, and it does look better than the screenshot I took, but just to show you that I Can Quit website appears in English, but there's a drop-down menu where you can have it translated into a number of languages. There are videos there and resources there that are language and culture specific. And if you are willing to refer your patients to Quitline, you can see in that red circle there, that online referral form that you use for everybody else has a spot there to tick yes, an interpreter is needed for this person and this is the language that they speak. And there's also an example there of the Vietnamese quit kit. There are quit kits in multiple languages, so that's there that you can order that and have that in your clinic to give to people, or you can send people to the I Can Quit website to see those resources themselves. So one plug I'd like to give, and one very big thank you, is to the Hunter New England Multicultural Health Service. So many thanks to Ashley and to his team, who have made it possible for us on our Care to Quit study to recruit people who don't have sufficient English to participate in an English-speaking interview and consent process. So they've very generously provided some translations of those materials, provided videos that we can use to recruit people, and are assisting with translating our telephone interviews so that people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to participate in that study, which is about smoking cessation support for people who've been diagnosed with cancer. We are very, very grateful to having that support, and are hoping, as I think Ashley and his team is, that those kind of partnerships will grow and we'll see much more participation for non-English speakers in standard research so that they're not excluded. And hopefully from this study, we will be getting a much better understanding of what the experiences are for smokers who are navigating through through cancer centres, and that study's operating in 9 centres in New South Wales and Victoria. So, in summary, I think it's really important that people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds do have that informed decision about whether to quit, and the support to do it offered just as often and just as widely as it is to everybody else. We know that there are diverse tobacco use patterns for CALD populations, so the conversations need to be a little bit broader and perhaps a bit different than they might be for English speakers, and we need to acknowledge the cultural value of smoking and how that might interact with their desire and their ability to quit. And that, of course, there are effective and language-specific cessation support that's available that we really want to commend to you to offer to your patients and to your clients. And that's all from me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Paul. I would love you to have a bit of dessert, but I also need you to go on the panel. So while you're rounding up your things there, Professor Paul, thank you so much for those insights, and thank you for the work that you do in helping to make the community safer and healthier. Really appreciate that. Professor Paul, when you get a sec, some lovely chairs on stage here with your name on it. I'd also love to invite back to the stage Thit and Dr. Goodsall. Come on down, we've got some chatting to do. I'm just having a look here at the Slido questions, and thank you so much, everyone, for being so engaged and submitting such great questions. Let's have a look. Okay, this one, while we're getting settled on stage, this one it should have been the most voted for, I think, but basically it's saying, how can we sprinkle a little bit more of Thit around our great state? She is magic. Did you hear that, Thit? Roundly applauded, and people think you're magic in the audience. So they want more of you around the state. They want to know how to make more of you. So if anyone can do that, please. Yeah. So thank you, Thit. You've really hit the message home. Thank you. And thanks again to our panellists for joining us on stage. Now, our first one is, does the Multicultural Health Service in the region engage local CALD communities during their community gatherings regarding preventative screening and other health promotional activities? This isn't specifically directed at one particular person, but since it's floated to the top, Ash, you want to pick it up? We'll wait for the microphone to get to Ashley. So how can we better engage region?
So thank you. Is this working? Yeah. I'm Ashley Young. I'm the Service Manager of Multicultural and Refugee Health. Yes, we do. We have liaison officers like Shingi, who's standing up the front. We have the Healthcare Interpreter Service, and Trish Owen is the manager, who's up at the back. And through our staff, we link in through all communities. The interpreters are all members of communities. We utilise their links and knowledge very well, and we do everything we possibly can to connect with communities and any services that need our help as well. So we reach out as much and wherever we possibly can. I hope that helps, but contact me if you want to link into anything.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
We had a very successful Multicultural Health Week last year, and we did all 3 primary screening programs with a lot of help from ISLET Multicultural Health Unit, And we have these interpreters and language support people, and between 80 and 90 women of different nationality from a range of age group attended that. And through that sort of exercise, I got more people coming to my monthly sessions and wanting to know what else do we do. So that sort of thing, yes. But the GPs, I don't know why, maybe it's hard for them to refer. And even if they do refer, if the patient doesn't go, there's nothing that they can do. And the particularly multicultural community, they really need to have trust in the person that they go and see. So if they don't know the person, particularly if you are not well enough, well, they won't do it unless they know that person well. So when a friend brings along and things like that, it works better, yes.
Thank you so much,
One for Dr. Goodsall. What do you think is the best approach to encourage more GPs and specialists to be more proactive in utilising interpreters when seeing cold patients?
It's a really good question, and I don't think I have the ultimate answer. I know that there is a national service which offers an on-call translator service to any provider with a provider number, so you can call that service and they will connect you with a translator, they say within 3 minutes. I guess one of the challenges with telephone translator services is that you do lose the 90% of non-verbal communication that we would normally rely on in a consultation, and I think it makes it very, very difficult, and we've heard about the ways in which that's difficult tonight. I'm lucky because working with the hospital, we do have a translator service within the hospital, and from that experience, I think the best encounters are with translators that I know because I work with them regularly. An excellent example is that we have a large Macedonian population here, and our Macedonian translator is a very active member of that community. I know her very well, and you can see that patients are immediately comfortable when she's in the room and I'm in the room and we're having a yarn as the patient comes in and having a chat. They're more comfortable speaking with me. We appreciate subtleties of the communication, and she's a huge asset because she does engage that community. I've known her to go around to patients' houses and help them with their bowel prep out of hours because she lives down the road from them and she knows them, or she's a third cousin. So I think whilst there are generic services available, my advice to GPs would be that if you can find local translators and engage even a couple, perhaps from patient groups that you see most frequently, and get to know them, you will have a much more fulfilling experience, and it will be a much more fulfilling experience to the patient as well.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Yeah, really appreciate your insights there, and I apologise for we sort of have this opposite lighting where you're all lit up and the people on stage are in the dark, but you know them by now. We're all friends, so it's good. Professor Paul, I've got one for you. I know you spoke about tobacco specifically, but we have a question here about something very topical, that is vaping. So this person wants to know, are there studies that show the relationship between vaping and cancer?
Not much yet. I think the thing with vaping is that it's very early days. We don't have people who've been doing it for 30, 40, 50 years yet, like we have had with tobacco. I think there's no reason to believe that it is healthy. It is probably less dangerous than tobacco smoking, but we don't know for sure. So I don't think we could say that it's safe or safer in terms of causing cancer. I think we would say it's an unhealthy thing, and it's not something you'd be recommending to someone as a cancer preventive measure.
Thank you so much. I think we've probably got time for one more, or are we pushing on? What are my timekeepers saying? One more? let's see now. Tom, let me just try and narrow down this question. How beneficial might probiotics be in bowel cancer prevention? This person wants to know, would it work to put a bit of yogurt in the Wheat Bix? Is that going to help?
It's such a common question, so it's great that it came up. It might save me answering it many, many times a day. The challenge with probiotics is that much of what's commercially available does not have enough diversity, and it doesn't have enough active live cultures to make it past the stomach acid that we all have that's designed to kill bugs. It's just a David and Goliath compared to our active biome. There's not enough in there. So we know most of the commercially available probiotics have no randomized controlled data to support their use, whether that be in recovering after a period of antibiotics, a period of illness, or in otherwise adjusting the biome. My general advice to patients is if you take them and you feel better, by all means keep taking them. But I have no data to support your ongoing use or make it a recommendation on my part. I think yogurt on Wheat Bix is great, but less so for the probiotics and more so for the diversity of what you're eating. Your food should be diverse, and that's where you're going to encourage that healthy biome. So diversity and less processed food is what we should be doing.
Fantastic. Thank you to the good Dr. Goodsall. And so he's saying diversity in food is good, and I think that is an endorsement for having dessert. So I'm glad that we all got that in. But can you thank our wonderful panel? Thank you so much. And I'm sure, look, if you have more questions, maybe bail them up after the event or look them up on LinkedIn or the social media platforms. I'm sure they're very, very generous and they'll probably be happy to help. So thank you again for those engaging questions. That was terrific. While you're finishing off dessert, it's another chance to think of more questions. We have another panel discussion coming up. So have a good listen to these next two presentations and see how you might be a part of the discussion afterwards. But our next speaker is focused on health pathways. Denise Lyons, a health pathways clinical editor and a nurse practitioner at Katara Family Practice and Hunter New England Virtual Kids. Please welcome Denise Lyons.
So I'll just be really quick too and try and catch us up some time. Doesn't matter. We don't need slides. Everybody knows what health pathways is, right? All right. So, oh, I can see them, but they can't see them. That's okay, because you've all seen them, right? I am first. Just have to say that I was excited to be invited to come here and get off the reserve bench. Sandra was supposed to be here, but I'm here. But happy to represent the Health Pathways team. Any of you have had any interaction with the team know what a great group of dedicated, passionate, committed clinicians who really do want to improve the healthcare system for better outcomes for patients. So really, that's what Health Pathways is all about. We try to take national guidelines and localize them and make them clinically relevant. We straddle the space between primary care and acute, and that can be tricky at times. But we have heard multiple speakers tonight speak about what a key role primary care clinicians and teams play in encouraging prevention, screening, early detection, and referral. Well, that's what I'm here to say. That's hard to do in general practice. General practice is stressed, now more than ever, as we heard Lee say. But there are things that can help us to do our jobs better, to achieve those outcomes for patients that we all hope to achieve. So one of the best things that's happened in the past 12 months has been the integration of the National Screening Register with our software that we sit in front of and use all day, every day in general practice. Has made the job of identifying patients who are overdue for screening so much easier. That's a great tool. Another great tool that I hope you'll all use is Health Pathways. I can't show you my beautiful slides, but you would be aware that there's a Central Coast Health Pathways website and a Hunter New England Health Pathways website because, again, we aim to make them locally relevant. We work with clinicians in those local health districts to interpret and integrate those guidelines so you can use them. There are pathways for bowel cancer. Thanks, Tom, for the plug for Health Pathways. The bowel cancer was very recently updated with two of your esteemed colleagues. We worked very hard to get that accurate and useful. There are pathways. We've worked with Ash on putting up a pathway that explains the translating and interpreting services that are available to primary care clinicians, and also on multicultural health resources that are available. So I hope that when you do open up Health Pathways every morning when you get to work in primary care, and leave it open on your desktop all day, anything you want to look up, whether it's bowel cancer screening, breast cancer screening, multicultural health resources, smoking cessation, it's all in there, guys. So please use those pathways. Give us feedback if something that you're looking for isn't there, and we will make it better. That's what we do. We try to make it better. Thanks.
Oh, okay. So you want a little break? Due to technical difficulties, we're going to have time for whatever. A little dance, a little cup of tea, whatever you wish. Don't stray too far. But we're going to set up a whole new stage so you can see the presentations properly. But yeah, a little breather for 5 minutes and then we're going to be back. So thank you again, friends, for your patience and your time. As I said, I'm glad that people got to recharge their glasses. That's good to see. As I mentioned, we're running a little bit over time, had a few technical difficulties, and with that in mind, I want to encourage you, if you want to be part of the discussion, if you have questions you'd like to put to the audience, you can still do that via Slido, but we won't get the chance to have a panel discussion, but it does mean that those questions will be answered after the event. They'll be emailed out. I think there'll be a way of getting those questions, very, very good questions that you've put forward via Slido. We'll get those answered and out to you. So thanks again for your engagement on that front. And while I'm at it, there are some resources, I'm told, to this side of the room. Our friendly friend over there waving to us. These are resources in 3 national cancer screening programs from the Cancer Institute. It's information there for patients about things like clinical trials, a whole range of other resources that are in language. So they're things that are very practical that can be used. They're over there on the table. Feel free to take some for yourselves or perhaps people in your practice, your colleagues. They are there to be used. So thank you so much for pointing them out, and feel free to get engaged with those and familiarise yourself with those resources. I'd like to now introduce to you Mary Mitchell-Hill, the Manager of Business, Finance, Quality and Equity at the Cancer Institute, New South Wales. She's a member of the senior leadership team and provides leadership to teams for the Cancer Plan and Corporate Services. Please welcome Mary.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for the opportunity to come and talk to you today about our Cancer Institute Quality Improvement Toolkit. Just to also say there are quit kits down there too in language, so we've got all of those things here for you. You can take home tonight because we actually don't want to take them back with us. So I guess there's some pros and cons to actually being one of the last presenters. One of the pros is that most people have said what I was going to say, so I can probably abridge this presentation, so a little bit like you. Don't have to go through everything. But just before we do start, I'd really like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today, the Awabakal and Wallamai peoples, and pay my respects to elders past and present and our Aboriginal colleagues here with us today. So as I mentioned, a lot of the stuff that I've got in these slides has actually been said, and Tracy had already gone through quite a lot of the information around the diversity in New South Wales with our multicultural communities being an entry point for migrants into Australia, and the information about the proportions of New South Wales population that were born overseas and actually speak a language other than English at home. So as you can see, this slide highlights all of that information. One of the other things just to say is that when comparing the Hunter New England Central Coast region to the rest of New South Wales, they're actually above the New South Wales average with a population born in Australia and have a lower proportion of people from a non-English speaking background at 5.2% compared to 21% in New South Wales. But we do know, and we did hear from Liz, that in the Newcastle area and also in the Armidale area, that proportion is much higher. And imagine, up to 150 languages, those small groups of people would be much harder to manage. So we also know that the Commonwealth's migration policy has seen an increasing number of humanitarian entrants settled into New South Wales, including in the Armidale region, and these numbers are expected to increase in the coming years. For the Cancer Institute, we're a state-based agency and we work in partnership with others in the cancer community to really try and reduce the incidence of cancer, increase survival rates, and improve the quality of life for people with cancer and for carers. And we also provide that source of expertise on cancer control for the government, for health service providers like yourselves, researchers, and for the general community. We work across that continuum. What's happened? Oh. Join Slido. There we go. Sorry, I just saw that the slide had gone. Yeah, so we work across the continuum. We recognise that the primary care sector really is fundamental in the prevention, early detection and management of cancer in the community. So underpinning our work are initiatives to try and improve cancer outcomes across these diverse cultural communities, as well as improving the partnerships we have with primary care and trying to enhance those research capabilities. So in support of all of this, what we have done is developed a New South Wales primary care cancer framework, which really outlines how we can enhance that cross-sector integration and engagement. With patients at the centre, the framework has a number of underlying principles to really support the achievement of this vision. Now, I won't go into these things, but we know that there are many factors associated with migration and settlement that can adversely affect the health of individuals and communities, and they can really be affected by that poor access. I think, Tom was talking about a number of those things, and the ability of some of these culturally and linguistically diverse people to be able to make decisions about their own healthcare. We know that sometimes it can be their attitudes towards prevention and cancer screening because it hasn't been something that's part of their life before they came to Australia. They can have that difficulty accessing and understanding and navigating the health system. And there's also a lack of culturally safe services and cultural awareness sometimes by health providers. We also know in regional areas they can be impacted even further with some of the distances that they have to travel and the unavailability of transport for them to get to some of the health services, notwithstanding the financial burden. And again, we've already heard about that. This diversity also can present challenges for providing that culturally responsive care that they need. We heard also, again, from, I think it was Tom, it was not Tom, Dr. Fong talking about the insufficient time in the main screen services. When you have to get an interpreter and actually try and work something in a primary care practice, you don't necessarily have that time to be able to provide all of the care you need to somebody from a multicultural background. And sometimes it's very hard to care for these people because you don't have previous medical histories or medical records to be able to back up or understand some of the things you're needing to investigate. And similarly, they can have a low health literacy and also low literacy. So even a written document may not be something that can support them. So we have heard about smoking, and in relation to cancer control, we know that from the information that's already been presented, some communities can have much higher smoking rates. So the promotion of cessation interventions is really important for improving their health. The Institute actually undertook some qualitative research back in 2018, and this identified some of the factors which influence smoking behaviour amongst core population groups. And with this information, we've been able to develop some initiatives, and I think some of those were already spoken about. So the Cancer Institute was involved in Shisha No Thanks. We do the campaign activity, and we also support the Quitline services. Campaign activity didn't appear to have enough evidence, and that's certainly an area that we've recognised as well with some of our multicultural communities. In the national cancer screening programs in the Hunter New England Central Coast region, we know that there are actually opportunities to improve. And I think Tracy's already gone through quite a bit of this information. But to say that, for cervical screening, we are below the national average in this area at 61%. For breast screen, it is, I think the data up there shows 48.3, but as at April, it's in the Hunter New England LHD, it's down to 46.8. And this drops dramatically in the Central Coast region, where it's actually down at 28.4% participation for that area for core populations. And we already heard about people who speak a language other than English at home have lower bowel screening participation rates as well. And just to reiterate the benefits, so 90% of bowel cancers found in the earlier stages can be treated successfully, and with mammograms every 2 years you can actually find a cancer before it can be seen or felt. And we are on the way, as Tracy mentioned, to elimination of cervical cancer, thanks to HPV vaccine and also the cervical screening tests. And I think one of the things that's really key is to understand is that over 70% of the people that actually do get a diagnosis of cervical cancer are either under-screened or never screened. So again, something to consider. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but really to say that we understand that, general practice has a key role in cancer control. So to support that role, in supporting people to quit smoking, to participate in screening programs, to improve or reduce their healthy risk, their risk factors. The Institute continues to build upon initiatives to try and address some of these things and support the primary care sector to improve outcomes for multicultural populations. What we have developed is an online quality improvement toolkit to promote the ways that cancer screening and prevention activities can actually be built into your practice or your health service. The toolkit is developed into modules, and they're easy to follow section modules. And through this quality improvement, you can see that your data is clean and organised. You can get to know your population in more detail than you may have been able to do before. And your patients have that opportunity to get better care with screening, getting an earlier cancer diagnosis and treatment, and having ultimately better cancer outcomes and survivorships. There are other benefits as well for general practice, and some of those are around meeting your RACGP accreditation. Similarly, there are the QI-PIP incentives which can be claimed when you're using the toolkit, and there's also completion of the toolkit modules can go towards CPD points. The toolkit is accessed via our website, so it's not that straightforward, but we can send you the links out for that. And as I mentioned, it is easy to navigate, and it's got a consistent look and feel. So when you go in, you actually can use each of the modules in the same way. It includes those manageable steps. So your practice can take those steps, and it will actually save you time in the long run once you've got all of that information and cleaned up your data in your systems. And the benefits of the tool is that you can go directly to a specific cancer screening or prevention module. So, for example, our recently developed alcohol module or smoking module, you can go to those directly without having to go through all of the toolkit. And you can open as much or as little as you like, depending on what you need at any one time. One of the other benefits is that once you've got all of that data and you've cleaned it up, it can support your conversations with patients then about cancer screening and prevention. And importantly, the modules also include information around called populations and ways to improve engagement with them and outcomes. And the refugee health assessment form is also included in the toolkit. So to further support primary care, we also have a number of other resources that you can see here on the screen. One of them that I will talk about, and it is actually down the back, is the cancer screening brochures and fact sheets. These are available online. They're in 38 languages, but we do have hard copies down the back. But the benefit of these to your patients is that they actually describe or explain the process for performing the bowel, breast and cervical screening tests. So it is a benefit to get them across what what they'll need to do. I won't go into this around Quitline because you've already heard about that, but just to say that, it is available for multicultural communities, and they do have Quitline advisors that speak Arabic, Cantonese, Mandarin or Vietnamese. And if you need to refer a patient that needs another language, we've already seen you can request another language, and they're happy to get interpreters in to be able to work with the advisors as well. And finally, the Institute website also includes a number of other in-language information sheets which can enable people to learn a lot more about cancer and cancer management. So again, they're available on our website. You can go in and you can actually get access to those. But we have a number of other multicultural projects or programs of work that are happening at the moment. The first one, and I think there's some people in the room that are involved in it, is the Refugee Cancer Screening Project. So it's a project that we've undertaken which really aims to increase the knowledge of participation and screening for refugee communities in the sub-Saharan African and Middle East regions. We have key strategic stakeholders involved in this project, and that includes the New South Wales Refugee Health Service and the Settlement Council of Australia. And it also includes the Northern Settlement Services in Armidale. So we've already had a number of conversations about it today. What were you going to say, Sheetal? Oh. Mosaic. My apologies. So that's a project that's underway, and it's been a really interesting project. Some of the information that's coming out of that from the refugee communities is really helpful for some of the work that we want to move forward with. There's also the Multicultural Stigma Project, and we've heard quite a bit about stigma already. We know that CALD communities can hold beliefs and myths around cancer which can affect their attitudes. They don't want to go and get screened. It might mean, if we look for it, we'll find it. So if we avoid going out, we won't find it, and those sorts of things. But avoiding some of those screening and prevention activities can result in poorer cancer outcomes because people will have a later stage diagnosis and poorer treatment outcomes. So it's really important that we can uncover those and try and address some of those stigma and myths to change attitudes amongst those communities. We have 7 priority language groups that are actually involved for further consultation, and that actually includes some of the language groups from this region, so Mandarin, Arabic, Greek and Spanish populations. So it will help us to be able to overcome some of those stigma that we see. And the outcome of that, while we still have consultation ongoing, the outcome of that will end up being a multicultural community and engagement plan where we can apply learning to other communities and to other programs of work. And finally, I won't go into much detail about this. We've already heard about clinical trials, and Kimberly's going to talk in a little bit more detail about that. But there's another program of work around increasing awareness of cancer clinical trials in multicultural communities. And it's really important because GPs are the first point of care for 85% of cancer diagnoses. And while patients are interested in enrolling in clinical trials. Without that information about what trials are available to them, they have no opportunity to do that. So whilst ever a GP is actually informed or has that information about trials, then they can share that with their patients, who can then go on and consult and discuss trials with their specialists for cancer treatment. They're currently recruiting, and that's for pancreatic cancer in the Newcastle area. There's more information about that actually on our website, so if people are interested in that, you can go in and search for Find a Cancer Clinical Trial in New South Wales. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was really great. Wonderful to get an idea there of the multicultural makeup of our great state, and also the amazing resources that you have on offer at the Cancer Institute. And a reminder, of course, there are more resources at the end of the room there. Hard copies available to share with your friends and families, your colleagues, your social group. Please make sure that these good people don't take it home with them. You know, share it around. That'll be great. Again, friends, sorry that we're running a little bit over time. A couple of unforeseen things that have come into the mix, so appreciate your patience. We've still got a very full room of people, so appreciate you sticking it out. But it is time to meet our final speaker tonight. Kimberly Williamson has worked at the Cancer Institute New South Wales for nearly a decade, has HR and change management background. Additionally, Kimberly oversees the culturally and linguistically diverse and Aboriginal PRMs programs, as well as the patient information portal. We really thank you for joining us tonight. Kimberly, looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate I'm standing between everyone and bed, or potentially the SBS News. So I will try and keep this short and sweet. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands in which we work and live, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Getting the right information to the right person in the right way at the right time is a challenge for us all, and this problem remains the Institute's focus as we continue to working towards improving the outcomes and experiences of people with cancer across our communities. The Cancer Institute New South Wales has made available a suite of resources that are publicly available to help healthcare providers, people with cancer and carers to understand and navigate the cancer system, from cancer screening, prevention, cancer treatment and clinical trials, through to survivorship and palliative care. You've heard about some of these from Mary, and I'll expand on the other resources we have available that you might find valuable to support the work you do in caring for people with cancer and their families. Our teams collaborate with experts across cancer care specialties and form partnerships with other organisations to identify existing or develop new sources. We are careful to not duplicate, so we look for the gaps in current information and work to fill them. The landscape changes rapidly, and keeping up with new information is only getting harder. It's important that our community has access to safe, easy to understand and up-to-date and evidence-based information. And one of the parts we play is to help filter through the large amount of information available, and using set criteria, look for the best information we can find and then make this available as easily as we can for our community. We've focused on making available high-quality resources across the whole pathway of care. With our increased focus on equity across the system, we now provide many resources translated in 8 or more languages. Interestingly, in a recent evaluation we conducted where we interviewed GPs and practice nurses, a key learning for us was that there was a clear opportunity for us to increase the promotion of our resources in primary care. There's not much time in GP consultation, so the quicker we can make accessing and finding our information, the easier it can be. It can be used in the primary care setting. So I'll take you through some of the key resources that can support the work that you do. Tracy mentioned CanRefer. So CanRefer is about quick access to some really useful information for a busy GP. Things like where to find a cancer service that has a multidisciplinary care team for specific cancers, where to advise a person who is asking for a second opinion, and where they would like to see a specialist that it speaks a specific language, where you can quickly find what cancer services have open clinical trials, and what are the recommended first steps in the optimal diagnostic phase, so quick reference to initial tests and the recommended timeframes. CanRefer quickly makes this sort of information available by putting in the postcode, either where you live or where someone wants to go for treatment, and it surfaces the cancer services, MDTs and hospitals that are closest to the location entered. Sitting underneath the results that CanRefer lists sits a whole program called our Reporting for Better Cancer Outcomes program, now in Year 12, where we have looked at the surgical volumes in the complex cancers and patient outcomes across all cancers, the availability of the multidisciplinary teams and cancer specialists. These clinician and data-driven networks have helped shape the cancer treatment landscape across New South Wales and continue to support this work. Where needed for rare or complex cancer surgery, we point to a specific location that may be out of area for person, but is one of the recommended places for managing the complex part of their care. A quick example of this is Central Coast Local Health District. They provide a specialist lung cancer care, but they network the surgery out of the LHD and bring the patients back for the remaining care close to home. Essentially, CanRefer does the thinking for you and keeps the information current as we update this directory as we analyse each year's cancer outcomes through our RobCo program. CanRefer is an important directory to help get people to the right place for their treatment. The next resource we have is EviQ, and another important information source, but this one gets into the detail of the specific treatments given. So EviQ is a national, all cancer centres, and an international, over 200 countries, source of truth for the safe delivery of all things chemotherapy and radiotherapy, management of side effects from these treatments, and information for patients across the spectrum of information. Think about EviQ this way. It provides point of care quickly and succinctly, as its prime purpose is to support busy clinicians at the point and time that care is given. Apart from the actual how to deliver chemotherapy or radiotherapy, which will be useful at times, there are some useful features that you might find valuable and may not know about, such as cancer genetics, from the more commons to the very rare. So when to test, when not to test, how to interpret the results and risk of developing cancers, what's the latest risk management advice for people with these mutations, and where to find more information if needed. It's a good resource to know about, as you may not need this information often, but when you do, it really covers a wide range of information developed with people needing quick information when they may not have easy access to cancer specialists or services, which is a really important resource in our rural and regional areas. Our next resource is EviQ Education. So this is another part of the EviQ program. It's also a national resource and it has over 49,000 users. This is designed on the premise that we need to get new information out to busy people, so provided in many different formats. The program has a tight scope to support the uptake of new evidence and highlight changes in practice and new guidelines. The resources on this site are not duplicated in other places and they're all freely available. The site contains the National Minimum Training Program for nurses and pharmacists at its core, but additional to this and of interest here are the videos, podcasts and rapid learning materials it provides on a regular basis. With a focus on rapid learning, some of these resources start at what can be provided in 5 minutes, covering critical information, to longer modules covering more in-depth information. You can also find the increasingly popular Cancer Conversation series of webinars that bring together multidisciplinary panels to discuss topics of interest to our cancer community. A few of these are highlighted for your interest. So there's some on smoking cessation, melanoma, principles of opioid conversion, etc. Now on to patient information. So the volume of information about cancer keeps growing and it's getting harder to navigate. Finding a way to get the right information to the right person and places remains a challenge across the health system. We're continually looking to improve how we provide information, and the patient information portal is a central place where you can find high quality information for patients and their families. The key resources we've been talking about all linked together to maximise their reach and use across the system. Our central website provides information for people with cancer and their families across 34 cancer types and a broad range of topics across the whole pathway of care. We link off to about 200 organisations to simplify access in one place. The team constantly looks for the best information they can find, whether that be locally, nationally or globally. The information is practical and succinct and is arranged as what do you need to know, what to ask or talk about, and what happens next, including checklists and question sets to help a patient be prepared for their appointments and to know what to expect. For those that like to get into the detail, there is also a directory of other safe, reliable resources that are local, national and international, where they can read more about the different topics. As part of our statewide patient-reported measures program, those patients that complete a patient-reported outcome measures survey through the Institute system, they can elect to receive an email that will contain links that are tailored to the issues that they have raised in their survey. The links they receive will direct them to the pages within patient information. So for example, if a patient reports they are experiencing high levels of nausea, they will receive an email with information specifically about nausea. Again, key content on this portal has been translated into 8 additional languages, and there is also a page that hosts culturally safe content for our Aboriginal patients. And last but not least is our Cancer Clinical Trials resources, which Mary has touched on. So cancer clinical trials provide patients with access to cutting-edge cancer treatment, care and support. Every cancer patient in New South Wales should be able to consider a cancer clinical trial during any stage of their cancer care journey. GPs in primary care are often an early point of contact when a patient is diagnosed with cancer. To increase patients' awareness and access to clinical trials, GPs in primary care should discuss clinical trials with their patients. So to support the primary care healthcare workers in learning more about clinical trials and better support patients, the Cancer Institute created an information sheet and a website. And this resource describes what clinical trials do in their process, clinical trial benefits and risks, and some information to share with patients. Culturally and linguistically diverse patients experience many barriers to accessing clinical trials, leading them to be underrepresented in trials. Resources including a fact sheet, digital poster, and a glossary are available to raise awareness and address common questions and misunderstandings about clinical trials. And just to reiterate, some of these resources are available at the back of the room. Thank you.
Thank you again so much for joining us, Kimberly. That was really fantastic. Great to hear about the resources once again on offer by the Cancer Institute. And I'm so heartened to hear that this stuff is free. You know, that's what we're talking about. We need to make it accessible, equitable. It's for everyone and it benefits the whole community when we're healthier. So thank you. I love that, and I love that so much of it is in language as well. So well done to you and the team. I hope that tonight we can spread the word about the good work that's being done and the amazing resources that are on offer. It doesn't matter what your background is, where you live, regional, city, doesn't matter. Refugees, new arrivals, or people who have had many generations here. It's all available for you. So please make use of it. Now, everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. There is an evaluation through Slido. Apologies again for those little tech issues, obviously outside of our control, but please feel free to share your thoughts on how tonight's gone. If you enjoyed this sort of initiative, we'd love to know your thoughts. The Cancer Institute New South Wales would love to keep the relationship going. Please let us know your interest on the evaluation, and if you'd like to be part of the Institute's clinical network, we'd love to know. Thank you, everyone, friends, for your support tonight. We heard about some of the barriers facing linguistically and culturally diverse communities and culturally responsive care that they need. Our speakers pointed to the importance of collaboration, so we need all hands on deck. You know, we need all of your support, and I hope that you have plenty of ideas to take with you. Maybe you've heard some nuggets of information that'll help you better manage some of the challenges that everyone's facing in this area. I've got to say, I was personally moved by hearing firsthand the challenges and anxieties facing cold communities, but also practitioners. You know, everyone's involved in this, and why equitable outcomes and goals are other things we should be aiming for. So as far as I'm concerned, the realities are stark, they're real. I'm glad that we shared them all tonight. It's a learning opportunity. But I love that what really came through for me was this spirit of working in concert. You know, we're in it together. We need everyone's ideas to make this a better place. So thank you to our fabulous speakers. Loved you all, whether you were on the starting lineup, from the reserve bench, you absolutely knocked it out of the park, so thank you. Thanks everyone for putting so much hard work into this event. So a special shout out to Ashley, to Shingy, Phoebe, Amy, Ellen, everyone else involved. They were just some of the lovely people I got to meet tonight. Thanks everyone in the room tonight for making this great. We really appreciate your support. More power to you. Good night.